in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Palm Industries. I have maintained for a long time that pepper spray is a way underused tool in law enforcement, and I get it. When you have to arrest someone, you do not want to have to get that stuff on you. But in personal defense or concealed carry scenarios, you want to create standoff and increase the distance, not go hands-on. I can tell you hundreds of stories about confrontations I have been involved with in real life that were resolved with some form of less lethal long before a gun would have been an option. Why not carry some in your pocket? Palm pepper spray is small, easy to carry, and it's effective. If you need something in between harsh words and a gun, this is a $12 solution. It's available on Amazon, makes a great gift. Go check them out at palmpepperspray.com. That's palm, P-O-M, pepperspray.com.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com.
So we did an episode a little while back about leadership, and one of the things that we themed that episode about a little bit was how attitudes are contagious, and specifically shitty attitudes are contagious. And one of the things that I have observed a lot around my little circle is some people tend to work so much overtime and whore themselves out for every last inch of work they can find as like a point of pride. They're very like excited, you know, they're like, oh man, I got this many hours on this paycheck. And it's like, is that the metric though of, you know, happiness and success and all of that is like, oh, I worked more hours than everybody else. And it kind of falls into that like live to work versus work to live life balance thing that we all have to talk about. But inevitably, people who work in our type of jobs, right? Public safety, the military, anything with consequence where there's some personal risk maybe involved, and even a lot of jobs that there isn't any of that, we tend to get burnt out. And we start to have all kinds of things that will nag at us and frustrate us. And that contributes to this shitty attitude. And I don't think that's specific to only public sector jobs. I know one thing that I don't have to deal with working in a public sector job that the private sector has to deal with is like, I'm not paid based strictly on my performance. Like if I don't make so many sales, I'm going to get fired or lose my job. Right.
Wait, I thought you had to write so many tickets. Otherwise you lost your job. That's like a thing, right? For
Quotas
the cops
and stuff. Yeah. No, not at least not where I'm at. But with that, I'm sure that people that work in those private sector jobs have similar kinds of pressures. Right. And people like us who are ambitious and driven and want to do all this stuff, we thrive off of some of that pressure. We like working under pressure, and it's a good thing. It's good for us. It's good for our personalities. But the problem is, as we've seen in more recent times, we keep running into this situation where we have to do more with less, budget cuts, staffing problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it becomes very frustrating because we're expected to do things that we didn't have to do before, but we're not getting paid any extra. We're not getting any more benefits or incentives or time off. And on top of that, we already do work too much most of the time. So I want to talk a little bit about avoiding some of that burnout and some of those work frustrations tonight.
I think this is a great topic. And one thing I want to hit right away is the impact of fatigue on human performance. We know really well, for example, that pilots get bad at piloting airplanes past a certain number of hours of piloting airplanes. That's why the FAA and the military have crew rest requirements, right? Is because we know you start making bad decisions, you react slower, your eyes move slower. And if you think you're immune to that, you're dangerous.
Yep. And I see that a lot in public safety.
Yep. And when I think about how many police officer induced car wrecks there have been, if you think fatigue wasn't a factor in any of them, you're out of your mind. So Mike mentioned public sector, private sector. I don't think it's unique to public sector jobs, but man, I think we are prone to them because we tend to attract those driven, dedicated people who are already wired for, service before self, right? That's part of our ethos. It's a big deal for us. It's part of our social norm. We enforce that on each other. Like, hey, you're leaving early? Really? Like, you get that. We police each other, sometimes to our detriment. And this is also a well-known generational issue, right? Millennials talk about burnout a lot. The Gen Zers experience burnout a lot, and we make fun of them for it because every generation after mine's weak and pathetic, obviously. Now, does that mean that Generation X or the boomers didn't experience it? Of course they did. They just handled it in different ways. They turned to alcohol and drugs and domestic violence. You name it, they did it. Oh, and consider how the world has changed over the last several decades. For example, women didn't work. And when women did work, it wasn't at the level that they do now. So it's great, society has progressed. But now, when I need a plumber to come to my house, my wife and I get to have a debate about which one of us is going to take off of work and which one's going to handle the kids to handle being there for the plumber. And is my job more important or is her job more important? Well, we both have big careers, and this is, if you don't think that's a stressor in my life, let me tell you, it is, and for her too, right? So the world has changed, and not just because the next generation is a bunch of wussies. In fact, one of my favorite sayings is, you know what the World War I generation said about the World War II generation? Bunch of wussies, right? So just think about that.
This is a good point because Jim talks about how, like, the debate about which one of us has to take work off to deal with the plumber or whatever. And if you think about it, it shouldn't be that big of a deal, right? Like, missing a day of work shouldn't be that big of a deal. But again, this is like this psychological trap that people like us fall into of like, but I have to be there. And part of it is like that fear of missing out. And part of
FOMO.
it is,
oh yeah,
part of it is we are so task and project saturated that like we don't want to lose any ground, right? And I think this is a key point because one of the things that we have to accept on the individual level as us, as an employee, right? As an individual officer, military guy, whatever, as a individual working for the organization, is that time is a constant, right? Like we all have the same number of hours in a day. There's no fudging that, right? And what I do in the same number of hours that Jim does might not be the same thing. It depends a lot on the kind of work that we do and the kind of support that we have and all of that. But at the end of the day, the work is always going to be there. And no matter, like, if on a macro level, looking at the big picture, there are 40 hours in a work week, maybe more, times, times however many weeks, times, there's thousands of hours that you're ultimately accounting for. And like taking that 8 or 10 or 12 hour day off isn't really that big of a deal. It's a tiny little fraction of it, right? But the work is always going to be there, and someone is always going to want us to do more. They're always going to expect more out of us. And if they can get away with it, they're going to take advantage of it, right? Because it's part of the bottom dollar. Like, it's part of the bottom line. So if you consider that you, the individual, is, this goes back to that people, ideas, hardware theme. You are the organization's most valuable resource, right? The members of the team are the most valuable resource. You need to value your own time accordingly. And that means you need time off to handle things like the plumber and the family and just your own mental health and sanity. And you can't be at work all the time. I mean, again, live to work versus work to live. You have to have some time to yourself, right? And you owe it to your employer, whoever that is, or if it makes you feel better, you could say you owe it to the mission to be all in when you're there, right? If you're at work, you're fully committed, you're giving it everything you got. But you can't do that full time.
Real quick, I have a slightly different take on that. And part of this is the marathon versus sprint idea. There are times when even when I'm at work, sometimes I need to back off of work.
Oh, that's true too, yeah.
Hey guys, I'll be right back. I need to take this phone call because it's the kid's school and something came up, right? And knowing that that's okay, that you can step away. And sometimes just from a creative perspective, I'm going to go take a smoke break. Or go to Starbucks and get a mocha fruity latte Cheeto or whatever it's called. Sometimes the best thing you can do is back out of it a little bit, sure. Right? And so, like, on one hand, I totally agree with Mike that, like, when you're at work, you're working and you owe them full capacity, which is true. On the other hand, have the self-awareness as a worker to know, like, sometimes you're going to get better work if I can go sort this stuff out and then come back to it. And just a quick example, one of my favorite maintenance guys, avionics guys. So he makes all the trons move around the airplane and keeps the magic smoke inside the big black boxes in the airplane. Because if it comes out, the black box stops working. He had a saying like, hey, when he's troubleshooting a big complicated electrical system on the plane, sometimes the best thing he can do is go and take a smoke and just think about what the trons are doing. And he may not be sitting there turning a wrench or whatever. And it used to freak out his supervisors. Like, how come this guy's out there sitting with his hands in his pockets? He's like, no, that's how I'm going to figure this out is by sitting in the gazebo, right? A
little bit of detachment. No, that's a real thing too. And I think to that same point, this is a cultural thing because I'll use a SWAT training day as an example. Some of our SWAT training days are long, miserable days. Like we're out in the range in the summer in gear and we're just, by the end of it, it's just like, what are we going to get out of doing like 2 or 3 more reps? Like you've reached that point of diminishing returns where I would rather have you like fully focused for these first couple reps and then take a step back and just kind of reflect on those things, then try to squeeze out a couple extra iterations of training just for the sake of volume, right? There's a quality versus quantity component to that speaks to what Jim is saying. And that's part of it though, right? So there's a cultural side to it in terms of what Jim is saying, which is like, even if you're at work, you have to be able to take a break and take a step back. I agree with that 100%. But kind of on a more philosophical level, when you go into work and you're thinking you have to give 100% all the time, the best way that you can give 100% is by being able to turn that off at some point and going home and, shutting it down for the day, because otherwise the quality of your work will suffer over the long run. And if you value your time and you value your contribution as a member of the team, you have to recognize what makes you worth the money. And part of that is just taking care of yourself, right? And I'm not talking about specifically being worth the money in terms of pay, because we can have a whole other conversation about like, they don't pay me enough, which is probably true. But as it relates to your attitude, you're still getting paid. And I think it's important that we all recognize we're all replaceable. Right? Someone else can do the job. And sure, I wish that some people would take better care of us on some level, but you just need to recognize that part of what makes you worth it is sort of that like deliberate, intentional effort of saying, okay, I'm at work now. I'm going to give it what I have. And then when I'm not at work, I'm not at work. I'm going to take a step back and relax and recover. So all of this stuff is the sort of thing that can lead to frustrations and lead to burnout. And all of that will negatively impact our productivity at the end of the day. And one of the things that sort of led this podcast to be created was dealing with those shitty attitudes, people who are burnt out. And I remember there was a point where I was getting frustrated with stuff that I was seeing and decisions that were getting made, and sort of the culture had shifted a little bit around the area where I was working, and I was getting irritated, and I needed to put that somewhere. I had to channel that. And over the years, what I found is that there was a time I was working in a job. I was kind of on standby for something, and I'm sitting around a table, and there's a bunch of older, experienced, kind of veteran cops sitting around this table, and they start just bitching and complaining about everything. They're talking shit about, they're name dropping commanders and politicians and this and that, and it's just all this negativity, man. It's just like, those attitudes are contagious. And when you sit in that little echo chamber and everyone is just bouncing that stuff around, it's like a cancer. It just spreads and it spreads and it spreads. And the thing about that is like, all right, rather than be just another one of those people, I'm going to try to take this and say like, all right, these people won't listen to my ideas. Let's put this somewhere. And then Jim and I start talking like, hey, I'm frustrated about this stuff at work. What would be a better thing? And then eventually this podcast came to be. It was something where I can take the things, my sort of idealism, and channel it into a project, a creative outlet where we can talk about these things, right? So that's kind of how this came to be, is a little bit of that. But that negativity is something that you have to recognize is within yourself. And you have to do something about it. You have to take some positive control over your own outlook on things, because those attitudes will spread and they're contagious.
And it's okay to have a bitch session at work. Like, that's fine. But when every grouping of people is just a bitch session with like nothing useful coming out of it, you're probably not getting yourself anywhere, right? It's like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, doesn't get you anywhere. You got to do something about it. And, we're 40-year-old white guys. We have a podcast. We smoke meat. That's what we do. We talk about World War II. Mike mentioned frustration, and I think frustration is a big, big part of burnout as a concept. Wall Street Journal just did an article about micro frustrations. I'm like, what is that? Like microaggressions? What kind of millennial BS is this? And I read through it and I was like, it's actually got a good point. So on frustration, it can take a lot of different forms, from these big institutional things like feeling like society is decaying, or the work I do doesn't matter. We're going to arrest guys and the DA is just going to let them right back out the door, or the judge or the jury or whoever, the legislature, Obama or Biden or Trump or whoever. There's that. There is a big picture in your own life. Like, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm getting passed over for career opportunities. I'm in a dead-end relationship. I'm in a dead-end job. Everything sucks. Okay, so there's that type of frustration. There's also, like I said, these little micro frustrations, the little daily ankle biter shit that makes your life hard. Like, you go to try to log into your computer and it takes like an hour and a half to log in.
Every day.
Or every time you go out to your police car and there's something broken on it because the agency won't replace the police cars, or whatever.
Getting a little triggered here, Jim.
Yeah. Or
how I have a brand new police car and there's shit wrong with it. It's like, what are we doing here? This is brand new.
Or every military base I've ever been on, the entrance to the building faces away from the parking lot, and they put out all this like grass that you're never allowed to step on because the grass is sacred. Or better yet, they xeriscape it. It's gravel. And so the gravel is sacred. You're not supposed to walk across the goddamn gravel to get to your job. And so like, I have to walk an extra 3/4 of a mile every day.
In the air.
Oh yeah.
Fuck this.
Yeah. Sergeant majors live for that. Right. So there's like those daily little frustrations, the PC load letter on the printer, all that stuff, right? And then there's a different kind of frustration, like what I would describe as kind of social frustration, where you don't feel accepted by your peers. Like, I didn't find my group, or you don't feel listened to by your bosses. And that's a thing that both Mike and I have struggled with over time. And sometimes it was our fault, sometimes it was our boss's fault. It's one of the reasons we do the podcast. The funny thing is we've both been asked, like, what does your agency think about you having a podcast? And it turns out it's fine.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways it's helped.
Back to the whole thing about what I was saying about how this kind of came to be on my end was it has complemented my work in more ways than it, has ever been conflicted with my work. It's done nothing but compliment, and a lot of people from work, including some bosses, have listened to some of it, and it's been nothing but positive, which is something we're going to get to in a second.
Yeah, and it's introduced us to people who we wouldn't otherwise meet, which I think has also helped, right? It helped us with the network thing. And I think a big part of handling this frustration thing is recognizing them. Recognize those sources of frustration, the daily ankle biter things, the little stuff, the big stuff. Recognize it, put a name to it, and be self-aware about the impact it has on you. Why am I gritting my teeth walking into work? Is it because I hate my job, or is it because the military always puts the door away from the parking lot? And like, is that a thing I can handle, or is it something I need to build a bridge and get over? Right? And, if you're going to do a career, it's the sort of thing you just got to accept.
Yeah. So, and this is where the kind of punchline in some of this, right? People who complain a lot and get frustrated and burnt out and have shitty attitudes, it's like cancer. It spreads, right? It's contagious. And every day that you walk in and you surround yourself with that, all that negativity, you're just reinforcing it, reinforcing more negativity. And here's the thing. You don't have to take a part in it. You can excuse yourself when people start complaining. You can be the positive source of energy in the room. You can be the one that kind of always has that good attitude and always challenges people to see things on the, look at the bright side, if you will. And that's something that like takes intentional effort to do. It's like practicing daily gratitude, right? And it's not always easy. I'm not telling you that it's easy, but it is a choice that you get to make.
And I want to be clear, we're not just telling you to suck it up or to pretend to be positive when things are really bad, right? Especially when sucking it up forever has been part of the problem. When all you do is just try to ignore it, and then just grit your teeth through the day. It sounds trite, but in my mind, this comes down to the concept of like grace, which is foreign to me because I'm not a super religious cat, but have the wisdom to accept the things you can't change and change the things you can't accept, right? Don't talk about problems unless you also voice a realistic solution. Otherwise, all you're doing is making noise, right?
Yeah, that thing that Jim said about the wisdom to accept the things you can't change, and that actually it comes from Stoic philosophy a little bit as well. If you wanted to get out of the religious side of it, right? The whole serenity prayer, if you ever seen that, was actually something that came from Stoicism. But the point in this is that you get to take some ownership in the things that you have control over. And your outlook goes a long way. Look, at the end of the day, whether or not the things on your police car get fixed in a timely manner or to the level of expectation that you have, or if they are going to redesign the buildings and the parking lots to Jim's specifications or whatever, is not something that we have a whole lot of say in, right? We might be able to make some kind of a voice or make a point or send a message, but at the end of the day, that is not the thing that I have control over. And I also can't control my coworkers. I can't control my bosses. I can't control the political climate. I don't get to say anything about the budget. I don't really have any influence over those things, but what I do get is an influence over my own outlook and attitude and how many fucks I give about those things, right? And there's a point, kind of like Jim said earlier about taking that step back, taking a smoke break, whatever. There's a point where you just go like, well, there's nothing I'm going to do about this. So I could either be miserable all day or I can just, like you said, build a bridge and move on. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't say like, hey, these things are kind of annoying and do whatever things that you might be able to do to fix them. But that's different. Being pragmatic is different than having a shitty attitude. And you have to make sure that you separate those two things, because part of accepting the things that you can control and the things that you can't is understanding that sometimes your efforts are not going to work, right? Whatever it is that you're doing. And one thing that's a big one is the more positive attitude you have about this sort of thing, the more like compelling and credible your position's going to be. If you're like, hey, I'm trying to help, I'm trying to fix this thing, that's different than like raising your hand at the town hall meeting and be like, yeah, I want to know why we're not getting paid more. What the F, right? It's more about coming to them with solutions instead of problems, right? So speaking of things you can and can't control, the things that you can control, your own habits, your own patterns and behaviors, those things will influence your attitude. And again, these are choices that you get to make throughout the day, and you have to be intentional about that.
So within things of your control, you control what battles you pick. That's individual disagreements at work, but it's also like what working conditions you will tolerate. What will you put up with before you say, no, I'm good, I'm out. And you're allowed to make that decision. So every day you come to work, you're making a choice to go to work, right? There's another set of choices you can make that might simplify your life. And this is an analogy. And anytime I talk about analogies, I got to preface that they're never perfect, right? So if you take it too far, it's going to lose meaning. But imagine you're juggling all the tasks you have to do in a day. And you can't possibly juggle all of those balls you got to keep in the air. There's just too many things. There's plumbers, there's job stuff, there's your schedule, there's your significant other, whatever, and all the things they want you to do. You're going to drop some. You get some say in which ones you drop. And you have to have the sense to know what things you can drop, what things are bouncy balloons that will bounce and survive, and what things are glass and will shatter if you drop them. For example, you might have to miss a kid's soccer game or birthday or whatever, and you can miss a certain number of those in your life and in your kid's life, and your kid's gonna be fine. But if you miss all of them, that's going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue for you, your spouse, and your kid. Same thing with work stuff. You can be late to work so many times before it's an issue. And you got to read the room. There's some jobs where that is never okay, and the world will end if you're 1 minute late, right? And there are jobs where, I was doing PT until 8:30 this morning, whatever it was, right? And you have to have the sense to know where you've got some wiggle room and where you don't have wiggle room with every decision you make, right? And that takes work and introspection, self-awareness, and reading the room. But think about that as you're scheduling your day. Think about that when you're trying to figure out, kind of triaging what battles you're not going to pick that day. And your life will get better for it.
And this leads us into sort of the bulk of this talk, which is about overworking ourselves. Because in terms of scheduling our day or looking at our day and making decisions and being intentional, the truth is usually we do this to ourselves. Our bosses and our organizations come to expect these things because we have essentially conditioned them that this is what our output is going to be, right? And part of that is boundary setting. And Jim kind of alluded to this a little bit. And that boundary setting, if there's anything I have learned over the last year or so in my personal journey of growth about boundary setting, it has a lot less to do with laying a boundary down for somebody else and more about giving yourself a boundary and saying, this is what I'm going to do if X happens, or this is what I'm going to do if Y happens, and enforcing that for yourself, not expecting anyone else to meet that expectation, but making sure that you are setting boundaries and enforcing that on yourself. So we have a tendency to overwork ourselves, and our bosses can have high expectations and push us to want to get things to the next level, and that's okay. But how you manage your own time and how you set those boundaries is a you thing. That's a you problem. And you have to kind of embrace that and be like, well, boss, I'm off at 5. So which project would you like me to deprioritize to get this other task done? Like, those are things that you have to just, instead of just like, well, I'm going to stay until all night. Like, no, not necessarily. Like, I can't do that. I have other obligations and I want to just chill at some point. Right. So like I said earlier, there's always going to be more work to be done. And if your employer can get you to do it, to either stay late and do it or to do it on your own time without having to make adjustments themselves, they probably will.
They get paid to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maximize productivity and, profits or whatever. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Most employers, and especially the government agencies, but even like volunteer groups, even if you're the den mother for the Girl Scouts or whatever the hell it's called, or Civil Air Patrol, they will suck everything out of you that you let them. Time, energy, emotional investment, they will pull it. It is on you to set your limits, and it is important to remember that those same employers spend millions of dollars training and hiring managers and commanders to influence you and manipulate you in a way which will win your loyalty and your enthusiastic cooperation to achieve their objectives. And those same employers will lay you off and replace you with a robot the instant it's fiscally beneficial to do so. In fact, they're obligated to do that. Law enforcement does it. Has law enforcement ever had layoffs? Yes, it has. Has the military ever had layoffs? Yes, it has. We call them reductions in force, RIF. I've seen 3 over the course of my career. Okay? And most big businesses do it. Being clear-eyed about that will help you keep everything else in perspective.
Yeah, so you have to set good boundaries. And again, it's making those limitations known to your leadership and your bosses. Sure, that's part of it, but again, like I said earlier, it's something that you have to enforce yourself. So you have to be willing to set work aside. You have to be willing to say like, "Hey, I'm going to get this done, and then I'm going to go home and I'm going to take the night off and not think about it." You have to have that like healthy balance so that you can give your maximum effort when you are engaged in work, right? That's a big part of this, is understanding that your quality is going to be a lot better, right? You're going to be more productive and more beneficial to your employer if you're switching back and forth between turning it off and on, right? If you are the type who goes home and then decides to open up the work computer or go log into something and start working on stuff because you want to get ahead, or it's just on your mind, and now you're doing work that's unpaid and you're not getting, you did that. Your bosses can't, they're looking at, did the project get completed, right? And was it done to the level of, to the expectation that we expect, that we needed. They don't care about how and when it got done. So if you need more time to get it done, that's on you to voice. It doesn't mean that you start just sacrificing your own time to do it. So understand that if you are deliberate about making those choices and you're telling yourself that like, hey, I'm going to be all in at work, but that means that I'm going to be all in at home when I'm at home too, right? That you have to hold yourself accountable for that because no one else is going to do it for you.
And there's a maturity and a longevity angle to this. If you're in a 20-year career or a 30-year career, you're in a marathon. And there are behaviors that I expect from an 18, 19, 20-year-old enlisted troop who's going to, serve for 2 to 4 to 6 years, who's presumably single or close to it, right? That I don't necessarily expect from someone who's got a spouse and 2 kids, who's in it for the long haul. And I got to be realistic with myself. There were things that I could get away with when I was 19 or 22 and single, that I can't get away with at my age and my stage in life. I just can't. Does it mean I don't care? No. Does it mean I don't have a work ethic? No. But it does mean I got to get out there and get my kid to the soccer game. and that's okay. And I don't have to feel guilty about that. And that's another thing, you know, feeling guilt is one of those things that like eats at you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guilt and fear of missing out. Those two will.
Oh yeah. And with the marathon thing, like your career may not be as important as your marriage. It's not, but statistically it's going to last longer than your marriage. Welcome to the 21st century. It's true.
Yeah.
We have a saying in my old command that welcome to the command. Here's your divorce papers and your fancy watch, right? So just staying at work for the sake of staying at work is pretty dumb in most jobs, especially if you're not getting paid by the hour, right? If you're hourly wage, which a lot of people are, you're there to make money. Got it. If you're salaried, probably not. I work better and harder when I do get the hell away from the office. And that's day to day. And that's also like take vacation days, take leave days. One of the saddest things I ever hear is guys talking about, like in the military, you hit a threshold of leave days where you hit use or lose. And guys are like, yeah, I got 69 days of use or lose. Huh, I'm all about this job. And I'm like, that is sad. Like
go use that shit.
that is part of your pay and benefits is to use that. And you're making yourself worthless just by being here isn't helping anybody.
Yeah. And a lot of us feel pressured to work extra, you know, and sometimes it's because like we've learned to need the money. We've learned to like rely on the overtime and rely on the extra income. And sometimes it's fine. Like sometimes it's, I'm saving up for a down payment on the house, so I'm going to push really hard this year and work as much overtime. And I've been there. In fact, in a big way, I'm pretty there right now. And in cases where you're being compensated appropriately, like, and you're doing it voluntarily, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not discouraging you from taking on some extra work or doing some extra projects. And for a lot of the people like us, a big part of the reason that we do it is because we're passionate, right? And we get something out of it that money can't buy, which is like that sense of purpose. And, you know, we get some satisfaction out of doing these other things. And that's fine. It's like, I'm not discouraging that at all. I've been there. I can't tell you how many times I've worked on classes or lesson plans or PowerPoints on my own time, not at work. And a lot of that is because I really care about the product and I really want to put something into it and make it good. And it's a creative thing for me. Right?
If you're doing it for you, that's one thing. If you're doing it for some perceived external pressure that sometimes isn't even there. Like, I don't know how many plans and presentations I've worked on that one other person saw.
Yeah.
And it didn't go anywhere, and it was never going to go anywhere, and they were giving me busy work because they didn't know how to manage their people.
Yeah. And it happens. And sometimes, like I said, for us, we get the satisfaction out of that, out of doing something like that. And that's, you know, that's okay. But this speaks to what Jim was talking about, the marathon versus a sprint thing. Our careers are generally going to be more of a marathon than a sprint. And you can't expect to run headfirst into a wall for 20 or 25 years or whatever it is and expect to come out the other side of it okay and like normal and healthy.
There's a line from Grey's Anatomy of, why do you keep hitting yourself in the head with the hammer? Because it feels so good when I stop.
Yeah. But some people never stop is the thing.
Yep.
And there's a longevity piece to this where, like, when you do finally stop, how long are you going to last when you do, right? So you have to pace yourself, and it's okay if you're going to do sprint, if you're going to go run headfirst into a wall for a little while because it feels good when you stop, that's fine as long as you stop sometimes, right? Like, take a break, take a vacation, like Jim was saying, and recognize the long-term effects about stress and sleep deprivation and those sorts of things. And a big part of this is, Jim mentioned like the project that he works on that no one else is going to see, right? Consider the payoff. What's the payoff going to be? Like if I pull this off, if I get this project done, like what am I actually going to get out of that? Am I just going to move on to the next project? Like, it's like, okay, I accomplished this one thing and now I'm just moving on and now I'm on to the next thing. Or is this something that's personal? Is this something that I get some other kind of satisfaction out of, right?
And there's a slippery slope there that you got to watch out for, right? If in your triaging, you start justifying just not doing anything, you become what we call retired on active duty, right? Where you're just sitting there breathing up the air. That's not what we're telling you to do. And I've been there. There are days where I'm like,
but it's the burnout though, right?
Yeah.
Like this is where like you're frustrated. You've been working so hard for so long and you're just kind of over it. And you're just like, fuck this. I'm just going to sit here and play. I don't know what you play on your secure computers at work, Jim, Solitaire or something, Free Cell. I don't know, like Minesweeper, like I'm just going to sit here and fuck off on my computer.
We just drop classified documents on Discord. I'm pretty sure that's what we do. Fuck.
You can be that guy, right? You can be that guy, but guess what? You want to know what that guy brings to the table? That shitty attitude that we talked about earlier, right? He's not the one that's contributing in a positive way and being that source of, productivity and all that. So you just have to, it's all about balance, right? Don't forget to live. Work is a means to an end, right? Yeah. And I get it. Like for a lot of us, it's a calling. It's a sense of purpose. We get a lot of fulfillment out of our job. It's rewarding work. I understand, but don't forget to live outside of that a little bit and don't let that be wrapped up in your identity.
So as far as some strategies of what you can do to fight this tendency to either work yourself to death or just sit there and breathe up all the air, in my mind, it starts with periodically, maybe daily, depending on where you're at, stop and do a self-check. So on your drive to or from work, or while you're shaving, or in the shower, or whatever, do an honest self-assessment. Are you happy? Are you healthy? Are you screaming at your kids all the time for no good reason? Are you gritting your teeth every time you interact with your boss? Okay? Do that kind of self-assessment and kind of see where are you right now. When you feel your blood pressure going up because it takes 15 minutes to log into your computer, maybe during that time, stop and say, am I doing what I signed up for? Do I want to stay here? And I think that's a valuable question.
And I think if you do that, you are so much farther ahead than a lot of people. Because what tends to happen is people will have that shitty attitude, burnt out, whatever, and they're just stuck in it. Right. And if you just recognize, if you take a minute to be like, I think I'm going to go take a walk. Like I'm going to go get some fresh air. I'm going to go take that break. Like if you do that self-assessment and you have that kind of introspective moment where you're like, I need to put this down for a minute and go like reset. That's huge. Take a mental health day or a mental health afternoon or whatever. And that puts you so much farther ahead of the curve, I think. Just the awareness of that goes a long way. And for everyone, we're all going to have a different kind of outlet, right? Like one of the trite things that everyone talks about is like, oh, get a hobby. Go get a hobby. Yeah, we all need hobbies, right? Like
podcasting, smoking meats, and World War II history.
Yeah. And I struggled with this for a really long time. To find something that was not related to work. It's like, well, I like to, I'll go to the gym and I'll PT and do exercise and stuff, but like I'm always thinking about job performance, right? Jiu-jitsu is fun, but I'm thinking about fighting at work. I enjoy shooting, but I shoot at work. Like I need something outside of that. And like to try to find a hobby that really is something that like clicks with you and is something that you're passionate about and that you're into. It's hard to do, but like really try to find something and make it a habit, make it part of your routine and make it something that's positive for you that is not related to work at all. And it's something that is accessible, right? I used to go rock climbing a lot. That was like my happy place for a little while. Now I do the guitar, I play my guitar, like something like that, right? Have something creative. I think the part of your brain that you use with a creative outlet is something that probably, if you're in this like kind of dark, frustrated, burnt out place, is not something that you're using enough. And that's its own kind of muscle that you need to exercise, if that makes sense.
That is something that obviously I think Mike and I have both experienced by doing this project.
Oh, absolutely.
It's been a creative outlet for us.
And certainly a point of like personal growth has come from
Absolutely.
it. For sure.
And for me personally, secondary to this project, I've also written magazine articles for a gun magazine. And that's the first time I've ever been like published in print where I can like open up and see something I produced. And so I've never had a job outside of my job, right? That was my first like little stick of my toe in the real world. And I got some pretty positive feedback about it. And it helped my self-esteem. It helped, it gave me something to do, and it gave me a whole series of projects that weren't work. When it became work, I was able to kind of step out from it. But I really genuinely enjoyed my time writing those magazine articles. And it was so far out of what I do at work as far as flying airplanes and that kind of thing. I got a lot from it.
Yeah.
And I think it made me a better at my main job. One thing I want to hit is, in terms of your outlets, doing something physical, especially if you've got a job that's super not physical, right? And this is an area where law enforcement, I think, is kind of a neat example. It can be incredibly physical for short bursts of time. You're chasing a guy down, you're wrestling in front of a 7-Eleven, whatever. But an awful lot of law enforcement, my understanding, is sitting in a police car or a jump out van or whatever, and you're just sitting. An awful lot of military jobs, especially those officer jobs, you're sitting in an office. You got to get outside. And we did a whole episode about, go touch grass, get outside, and working out is one thing. You need to go jack some steel. But in addition to that, do something where you're moving your whole body. Go running, go hiking, go jogging. Do something where you're moving your body. You need to do that. And you need to get away from the computer screen a little bit, like just for your eyes. Like focus your eyes someplace off of your computer screen for a while. That'll help.
Yeah, I think, and along with something physical and moving your body, like Jim is saying, I think a big component of that is like get outside and get fresh air and sunshine specifically.
Vitamin D therapy.
Yeah, you need to get like some daylight. So I think those are huge. So the idea with outlets is like you need somewhere you can put your frustrations. You need to have a way of channeling those things. And sometimes it can be something pragmatic like work related, right? It could be an outlet where you're like, hey, one of my favorite things when I talk to new cops, or not brand new cops, but cops that have like a few years on, but they're still pretty young in their careers, and they start getting this shitty attitude, and I sense that in them, is I tell them, you need to start training and teaching people. You need to go become a field training officer and start training new guys. Because if you want to have an impact on, when I became an FTO, a field training officer back in the day, I said it, the reason I wanted to do it was because I have high expectations for the people around me and myself, and I'm not happy with what I see. And so I wanted to raise the bar, and that's why I became a training officer. And so that's one of the things that I tell cops at that stage in their career to do when they start getting kind of salty, is to start training people. Start doing something where you can problem solve and channel some of those things into something positive.
Oh, and if you think you know everything, that's one of the places you're going to figure out that you don't.
Yeah. Well, and it's true. You'll learn things along the way, and also you just see another perspective, which is cool. Talk about this stuff. I'm going to just go on a little tangent about some of the foofy wellness stuff. But there is an exceptional amount of research that has gone into things like therapy and journaling and meditation and mindfulness and breath work and all of that, yoga. Like, I know it doesn't sound like something that, most of us feel like we have to get into. But the thing about it is, if you make something like that a habit and you develop that as I guess you could say a skill, right? As part of your routine, as something that you do, it becomes something proactive. You don't find yourself in this like salty, burnt out, shitty attitude state that you're trying to climb out of, and it feels impossible to do. You kind of turn it into something that you can do proactively. So without going like too far down that rabbit hole, I just want to say that those things are very well researched. They're actually really well supported by science. So look into those things. And I'm not saying you got to do any of them or all of them or anything, but there is a lot of good reasons to at least explore it. As it relates to some of the wellness stuff, the meditation and mindfulness thing is something that has a lot to do with your central nervous system, right? Your sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response. It's all about regulating that stuff. If you find yourself constantly stressed out, tense, under pressure, kind of at that, the RPMs are at like a 7 or an 8, like you kind of feel like you're always amped up a little bit and you can't really relax. Like, this is about how you regulate those things and bring that fight or flight response down to a manageable level. And there's a bridge, right, between the conscious and the subconscious parts of our mind. And in that bridge, or where that bridge exists, is in stuff like this, right? The mindfulness and meditation and all that. Journaling, therapy, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, like, do that stuff. I've always considered sleep to be like important. Like, yeah, we need sleep. Like Jim mentioned it earlier. In the aviation world, crew rest is a big thing, and it's because of all the research that's gone into stuff like that,
and also the crashes, right? Yeah. Like that's one of the ways we know is we've bent enough metal and made enough smoking holes in the ground that we figured that out. And my Army counterparts give the Air Force a hard time. Oh, you guys need to go get your beauty rest and get your manicures. Like, yeah, we do. And we know we do. Yeah. And I'm not helping you if I'm a smoking hole in the ground. So, yeah.
Yeah, write that down.
5-star hotel.
Yeah. I've always been a proponent of sleep. And I'm working on I was in a human performance like workshop recently, and there was a sleep expert that I'm trying to bring onto the show, hopefully as a guest, to talk specifically about some sleep stuff. But in terms of it being a priority, there's several layers to this, right? There's the impacts of fatigue and sleep deprivation, the obvious thing like crashing your airplane or crashing your car, right? Or just making bad decisions. So there's certainly a decision-making, mental acuity, like cognitive effects. There's all of that. But there's also a lot of like long-term health implications as well, in terms of like how long you're going to live when you retire and stuff like that. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into the sleep thing that I'm just now starting to learn more about in terms of making it a priority. But I'll tell you this, I sat in this workshop and this expert talks about all the sleep things. And one of these guys at work, he was a firefighter, obviously does shift work. He talked about his like kind of patterns and routines. And he's like, well, I get off shift at like 7 or 8 in the morning. The kids have soccer. I got to go to practice and the games, Saturday morning, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things this expert said was like, well, knowing what you know now, is going to that soccer game really the priority? And like, it was a little shocking to the room the way he delivered this, because after hearing everything this guy said, it was like, well, I'm not going to miss my kids' soccer games. Like my kids are the most important thing in the world to me, like I'm not going to miss that. And he's like, yeah, but if you want to like grow old and still be around when your kids mature and they have kids and you want to have like a fun and healthy lifestyle with them, and you want to remember them when you get older, and all these other things, like, is the cost of missing a soccer game if you're low on sleep really worth it? Like, is that the trade-off? Is it really the priority? And it makes
and it's tough for us to visualize that trade-off.
Yeah.
And it is real. And I told you about triage. Like, this is the kind of thing you have to constantly decide what's going to win and what's going to lose.
Yeah. So if you want to last long enough in the last for the long haul, sleep needs to be a bigger deal.
So for just some basic sleep practices, get the screens away from you within 30 minutes of bedtime. Make your bedroom dark, and I mean really dark. Get the blackout curtains, get them all the way to the edges so light's not creeping in. Tape over any LEDs, and oh my gosh, there's a lot of LEDs in a typical bedroom. Use your bedroom only for sleeping. So whatever other things you typically do in a bedroom, do that in some other room.
Here's the thing.
A little sex dungeon, whatever it is you do. But like, keep your bedroom for sleeping. And mostly what I mean by that, honestly, is like, get the TV out of there. If you're the type of person who has a TV in your bedroom, get it out. Control the temperature in that room. And something that comes up, especially as you get to my advanced age, is sleep apnea. If you're waking up gasping, or waking up with a headache, or waking up real damn tired, you probably need to get a sleep study. You probably need to get the CPAP machine, or at least like try Flonase, get your passages open, your air passages open. Because if you're not breathing, you're not sleeping.
Yeah, so some sleep stuff for me. First of all, there's one of the things that we'll talk about when we do the sleep expert, if I can get him on. They did a study on these Army artillery units, and they looked at like the number of hours of sleep and their performance based on accuracy and rate of fire, right? And they found that going from 8 hours of sleep down to 7 hours of sleep, they were at like 90% combat effectiveness. But if they went down to 6 hours of sleep, it was like 50%. And then 5 hours of sleep was like 28% or something like that. This is off the top of my head. I could have those numbers wrong. And then less than that was 15%. I mean, it falls drastically. So you really need to give yourself an adequate window for sleep. And if you're having problems with fragmented sleep, where you wake up after a few hours and you can't fall back asleep, there's strategies that you can, if you talk to one of these, whether it's through a sleep lab or some other sleep study or some other kind of assistance, doctor or whatever, there's ways that you can retrain yourself. And a lot of people that live in jobs like ours that are, we have those adrenaline dumps a lot. Or if you're doing shift work, like 24-hour EMS or fire work, where you're sleeping and then you get called out, right, to go to a call like middle of the night and then have to go back to sleep after, or expect to go back to sleep after. There's ways you can kind of retrain yourself to do that. And hopefully that's something we'll cover in another episode. But I'm terrible about screens. I'm on my phone usually at night when I'm laying in bed and stuff. But there's a lot that you can do in terms of improving the quality of your sleep and making sure that you're getting enough. But I think a lot of it is just you need to make it a priority is a big deal. Kind of outside of the scope of really what this episode is about. But I do think that it contributes to the negativity, right? Like when you're tired, when you wake up early, you didn't get a lot of sleep, you didn't sleep well. Now you have that shitty attitude going into the office, and then your shitty attitude spreads to everybody. This is the thing. At the end of the day, make some effort to surround yourself with positive people. And maybe more importantly, be one for others, right? Like when the people start bitching and complaining, try to throw a positive spin at that and maybe see if there's a shift in the room a little bit, right? And earlier, Jim mentioned the self-assessment, and he talked about how, like, do that self-check and ask yourself if, like, are you snapping at your kids? Are you snapping at your wife? Or those sorts of things, right? Like, don't forget that you also need to be a positive influence for your family as well, and for your friends and everything else. Like, it doesn't matter how well you do the mission or whatever if you're just a shitty person to be around all the time, So don't be that guy. Don't be the guy that's an a-hole just because he deals with a-holes all day. That's a you thing. That speaks more to you than them. So don't be like that, right? And like I said earlier, you have to pace yourself. The marathon and sprint thing, you know, think about it like intervals, like rest and work and rest recovery cycles. Think seasons, right? If you run for a little while, that's fine, but make sure that you back off and you take a break from time to time too.
Yeah, I like that. The seasons thing hits me real well. Like there are times to sprint and times to marathon. And in my world, man, we love crisis response. Oh my God, we have a crisis. We can ignore everything else and just deal with the crisis. Crisis response is fun. Strategy is hard. And you have to approach your life with some strategy. If you're just bouncing crisis to crisis to crisis and you're not taking care of anything else, you're going to fail. Like reality's going to catch up with you.
Yep. One thing about like the work-life balance thing that I haven't hit yet is I think there's something to be said about having some kind of routine or ritual for changing gears when you come in out of work mode, going into home mode.
Like Mr. Rogers, he takes off his coat, puts on his sweater, puts on his loafers, disassociates from the harsh reality of the real world. I like it. It's good.
Right. No, but like have some kind of thing where whether it's a smoke break or like go sit on the patio for a minute or take a breath of fresh air or listen to some music, but have something that kind of just is significant enough in your mind to kind of shift gears. I think that's a good thing. Don't be afraid to make and embrace changes. Like your habits and your routines are going to impact your attitude and your happiness. So one of the things that this workshop that I went to, again, we'll talk more about it. I got a couple guests, hopefully, that we're going to bring on. But one of the things that they talked about that I really liked is like try to make yourself just 1% better every day. Don't think that you're going to make life-altering changes all right at once. But if you could just make yourself 1% better every day, that'll go a long way. And I think in terms of like just having a good attitude and being a little bit happier at work and not being a source of talking shit and being negative all the time, like just be a source of positivity for people to go a long way.
One of the most important lessons I learned at the Air Force Academy, maybe the most important lesson, it wasn't, how to win a nuclear war in space. It wasn't the core values. It was honestly knowing when to say fuck it. Having the self-awareness to know when something wasn't going to get done, when I needed to walk out of the room. That self-awareness, the only way you can describe it is fuck it. Okay, fuck it. I'm done with this. Right?
Over it.
Like, I'm over this. I haven't slept in 3 weeks because I'm trying to get all this homework done for calculus and electrical engineering and astronautical engineering, and I have to make my bed for the inspection tomorrow morning because how clean my room is affects how I can fly an airplane or something. And I've got a PT test later that afternoon. Okay, fuck it. I'm going to bed. Like that was one of the most important like light bulb moments for me, was knowing when I had to let some of those balls fall, right? In the juggling analogy. If you're coming home from work exhausted and mad every day, you might be in the wrong job. And that's tough. It's tough to admit to yourself that, hey, maybe being a Marine is not for me. Maybe being a cop is not for me. Maybe being a lawyer is not for me. And you probably have a lot invested in getting there. But if you're miserable every day and you're making everyone around you miserable every day, you got to make a change. Yeah. And you might have to say, fuck it, I'm out. Right.
Or at least change shapes a little bit, right? Like if you're a cop, maybe it means a different assignment. I mentioned the field training officer thing. I mean, if you work in EMS or fire, maybe you could go a different path with that. If you're an attorney, maybe a different kind of practice or, something, but make a change. Embrace that.
If you are getting weird stress symptoms, and however it is your body reacts to stress, hair loss, your menstrual cycle's getting all screwed up, a lot of indigestion, sleeplessness, recognize them for what they are. They're stress responses. And start taking steps to manage them. And sometimes just the way human brains are wired, we focus on the symptom, not the cause, right? So, oh, I'm getting headaches every day. I'm going to pop aspirin every day. Well, maybe the reason you're getting headaches every day is because you're just physically tense every day, and you're not helping yourself just popping lots of aspirin. And maybe you need to go see a doc. Maybe you need to go see a shrink. Maybe you need to go for a run, but you got to do something. Just ignoring it is not helping you. And I think that's all I got.
Same. Don't be that guy. That's really all I got. It's kind of trendy, you know, it makes you one of the cool kids when you get all salty and you participate in the shit talking and the complaining and all of that. Like, it's very cliquey. People get around together and they all just want to talk shop and talk shit. Don't fall into that trap. Don't be that guy. I'm telling you, it's not going to pay off for you. You could do better than that. That's it.
All right, be safe out there. Be smart out there. I'm going to bed. F it.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And one last thing, our Facebook discussion group. We've got a little group going on Facebook. If you go to the groups tab on our page, you can join it. We've got more followers on our page than we have in the group. So I know there's some of you out there following the Facebook page that are on Facebook that are not in the group. Lots of like-minded people in there. So come hang out with us. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.